7:45, 7:45 a.m. So I'm about to go online. The ISKCON India Youth Council Western Division, where 150 youth preachers are gathered at ISKCON Ahmedabad. And I'll be starting to address them on the topic of Srila Prabhupada, the ideal youth preacher. Right. Should I begin? I'm also broadcasting this live on my Facebook and YouTube, Facebook page and YouTube channel, just so that you all know. Om Ajnana Timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kada Mahiyam Dadati Swapadantikam. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhyaevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. How much time do I have? What's the time frame? Okay. 40 minutes approximately. I wanted to begin by reading a couple shlokas from Bhagavat, if you don't mind. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, Srimad Bhagavatam 11.3.21 is a famous verse. Tasmad gurum prapadyeta jijñasush shreya uttamam shabde pare chanishnatam brahmanyu pashamashrayam. The translation is, therefore, any person who seriously desires real happiness must seek a bona fide spiritual master and take shelter of him. Here they added by initiation, which I don't think is in the Sanskrit. The qualification of the bona fide guru is that he has realized the conclusions of the Shastras by deliberation and is able to convince others of these conclusions. Such great personalities who have taken shelter of the Supreme Godhead, leaving aside all material considerations, should be understood to be bona fide spiritual masters. And then the next one, 11.3.22. Tatra Bhagavatam Dharman Shikshed Gurvatma Daivataha Amayayanu Vritya Yais Tushyed Atmatmado Harihi. Accepting the bona fide spiritual master as one's life and soul and worshipable deity, the disciple should learn from him the process of pure devotional service. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Hari, the soul of all souls, is inclined to give himself to his pure devotees. Therefore, the disciple should learn from the spiritual master to serve the Lord without duplicity and in such a faithful and favorable way that the Supreme Lord, being satisfied, will offer himself to the faithful disciple. I think there's one more that I want to read. Sarvato manaso sangam ado sangam cha sadhushu dayam maitrim prashrayam cha bhuteshvadha yatochitam. A sincere disciple should learn to disassociate the mind from everything material and positively cultivate association with his spiritual master and other saintly devotees. He should be merciful to those in an inferior position to him, cultivate friendship with those on an equal level, and meekly serve those in a higher spiritual position. Thus he should learn to deal properly with all living beings. So I'm going to end that. So today's topic is Srila Prabhupada, the ideal, what is it, ideal or perfect youth preacher? Let me see. Perfect youth preacher. Okay. Yeah. So first of all, Srimad Bhagavat teaches that you need a guru. And for ISKCON, Prabhupada is the founder Acharya. Prabhupada never taught that he was the exclusive only guru. In the purport of, let me read to you. I really like this purport of Srimad Bhagavatam 4:28-31. The disciples of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, this is Prabhupada's purport. The disciples of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj are all God brothers, and although there are some differences of opinion, and although we are not acting conjointly, every one of us is spreading this Krishna consciousness movement according to his own capacity and producing many disciples to spread it all over the world. As far as we are concerned, we have already started the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, and many thousands of Europeans and Americans have joined this movement. Indeed, it is spreading like wildfire. The cult of Krishna consciousness, based on the 9 principles of devotional service, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atmanivedanam, that Srimad Bhagavatam 7:5-23, will never be stopped. It will go on without distinction of caste, creed, color, or country. No one can check it. So, first thing is preacher. Ideal youth preacher. Prabhupada was a preacher. And preaching means making disciples, getting the people to follow. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taught that Jare Deke Tare Kaha, Krishna Upadesh. Now, Prabhupada was instructed by his guru to preach in English. Prabhupada's guru didn't say you have to go to New York City. He said preach in the English language. But Prabhupada himself had his own, he wanted to go to New York first. And then when he got some success in the United States, he went to Europe. And then he went all over the world 12 times. Well, to many places in a short span of 11 and a half years. I guess most of you have read Prabhupada's life history, right? It's hard to be interactive when there's 150 people sitting in one room. I like interactive sessions. So Prabhupada got success because of the youth. When he was preaching in the 1960s and 1970s, well, it's a long time ago now, right? For us, you can see behind me, those who are watching on YouTube and Facebook may not be able to see behind me the picture that is on the Zoom meeting. But there's a picture of Srila Prabhupada walking. You can see him in the Hyderabad Public Garden. This is August 1976. And I was a youth. I'm in the picture there on the, you can see behind me. I guess it's behind my left hand here. Anyway, holding the hand of a child who I don't remember who it was. So in this picture, I'm 21, completed 22 running. 1976 is 45 years ago. Where did the time go? And pretty soon, we'll have to go to the next destination, whatever that is. It's a mystery. But that the soul is eternal and that the public is ignorant of this fact is the reason for preaching. That's the reason for preaching. And what are we preaching? We say Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavat, but Prabhupada called it Vedic culture. Not Prabhupada, it's an ancient tradition. In Hyderabad, in a year before this picture was taken, it's a year and a half before, Prabhupada had a program and 10,000 people were coming every day to hear his lectures. And in the program, he said, please don't give up your culture. So Prabhupada was propagating Indian culture, Vedic culture. We were on the train platform with Prabhupada in Nellore. I don't know how many of you know of Nellore. It's 160 kilometers north of Chennai in Andhra Pradesh. So Prabhupada had a 2 days program in Chennai, which was called Madras in those days. And then he got in a train. And when he arrived at the station, 2,000 people were gathered to greet him, including the mayor and the Nadaswaram. You know Nadaswaram? It's a Chennai in South India, but it's long, with the drums, and Brahmins reciting Vedas, and girls, the Kanyas with the coconuts. And seeing all this, Prabhupada turned to us, small group of mostly Western disciples, but we had some Indian devotees by that time. And Prabhupada said, Vedic culture is more intact in South India. So Prabhupada, don't ever forget, this is my humble request, that Prabhupada was propagating Vedic culture. He wasn't propagating Western culture. And, you know, there was interesting in one of the verses I read, that's the duty of the disciple to give up all material attachments and only think of the orders of the Guru and only meditate on Vedic literature. So Prabhupada took this message, as you know, in 3 books. When he went from India to the United States, this is now 56 years ago, he had only 3 books with him, which was the first Pratamaskanda, first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. And that was it. That's all he had. He put the books in trunks, and the trunks were put in the boat, and he went in the boat. It took him 1 month to reach the United States, and he suffered heart attacks in the boat, ill health. I mean, they must have been mild heart attacks. If otherwise, he wouldn't have survived, isn't it? But still, he suffered, you know, being on a boat for someone who never traveled on a boat at the age of 70. It's very difficult. It's very difficult, to say the least, on the ocean for a month. You can only imagine the hardships that Prabhupada had to, because he had no time to acclimatize and he was elderly. And you know, when you get elderly, your body becomes weak. Yeah, you probably all have seen old people. They have difficulty doing anything. It's different with each person. So Prabhupada not only targeted the youth, but he was very successful after struggling and getting the young people to become surrendered devotees. So in order to do that, he had to give lectures. That was his routine, right? Every day he would give a lecture on Bhagavat, and 3 days a week in the evening, Gita, when he began ISKCON in New York in 1966. And somehow, you know, youth got attracted to him. So youth is a time when youth means the childhood is over, right? Ignorance of childhood is dispelled. You come to realize more and more, you know, you become more aware, more educated. But then there's the time comes in everyone's life. What do I have to do? What's the aim of my life? Now, because nowadays people are intoxicated, right? Intoxication is extremely popular. Those of you who are preaching to the youth, you might be aware of this, right? And because of this, you know, intoxication, I know here in the West, because I grew up here, I came to India when I was young, but still I was aware. And I also indulged in intoxication. I'm sorry to have to admit this to you. But there's a heavy propaganda that, you know, life is meant for intoxication and enjoyment. But we understand that intoxication is an illusion or a delusion. You cannot properly execute human, we see people are intoxicated, but they're working and earning money. So what does it mean? So the real aim of life, which is to destroy the papas, the sins, by engaging in bhakti, cannot be accomplished when one is intoxicated or when one regularly indulges in intoxication. Now, Prabhupada had to convince the youth, and at that time, 55 years ago, I mean, there was a heavy propaganda for taking intoxication, and I don't think it's gone away. It's just changed its form. There is legal intoxication and illegal intoxication. Now, some of those drugs like ganja are being made legal. I don't know in India if it's on the books or not, but ganja is everywhere. And, you know, it's an ancient tradition to take, what is it, bhang. You've heard of this bhang, which is where they mix ganja into some masala type of peya, I guess is the word. And they drink that and get intoxicated. So this idea that intoxication is okay destroys bhakti. And the real aim of Krishna consciousness movement and preaching is to get people to engage in Krishna bhakti. So Prabhupada when he was on that boat, he wrote his poems. I'm sure that some of you, if maybe most of you, are familiar with those poems. And he wrote, part of what I recall, because there's, it's not just 2 lines, but he wrote that how will I convince these people who are in the Tamogun and Rajogun to give up this type of, become sattvic? Basically, that's the aim, right? Gita says, Mamcha yo avyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate. Sagunan samatityaitan brahmabhuyaya kalpate. You cannot come to the spiritual platform free from all material attachments unless you give up bad activities, intoxication, illicit sex, gambling, and meat eating. And meat eating is probably the worst. Probably the worst. Because they're killing cows, they're killing their own mother. How do you convince people to give up these papachars? Prabhupada was able to do it to some extent. I don't think Prabhupada considered his mission accomplished. Although he wrote in the purport that I just read to you that many thousands of Americans and European youth are joining. And after Prabhupada disappeared, there were places in the world where he hardly touched, particularly Russia, where after Prabhupada's lifetime, there was an explosion. And we have like 80 centers in Russia and 25 centers in Ukraine. And then there's other countries where they speak Russian, like Belarus and the former Soviet Union, it's called CIS, right? What is it? Commonwealth of Independent States, they call it. So there's been a tremendous success, but that doesn't mean the mass of people became devotees. It's still a struggle. Whereas in India, Prabhupada told us, I remember hearing this on the Juhu beach in Bombay, that in India, more or less, everyone is Krishna conscious, somewhat Krishna conscious, he said. And we see, people know what is Bhagavad Gita. People saw the TV serials, Mahabharata, Ramayana. So they know the stories. They go to temples, they worship, Gaudiya Vaishnavas, Radha and Krishna, but they may be in Tirupati Balaji, Jagannath, Dwarkadish, right? Or how many people do Govardhan Parikrama, right? Lakhs of people. So India, Krishna consciousness, Krishna bhakti, keeping Tulasi Devi. Every Hindu has a Tulasi in the house, right? Prabhupada taught these things, worship of Tulasi, to us, Mlechas and Yavanas. And it's still, after 50 years, many Western devotees couldn't understand, I'm sorry to say, because they didn't come and live in India. And Prabhupada actually wanted that. He wanted the Western disciples to come here, see the culture, learn the culture. In 1974, where that was, I would call it, the first large international Gaur Purnima festival in Mayapur. 400 devotees from around the world. Before that, it was, even in those days, I attended that 74 Mayapur Gaur Purnima. There was only one building. That was also incomplete. It hadn't been finished, what is called the Kamal Bhavan, Lotus Building in Mayapur. How many of you watching this have been to Mayapur? How many of you gathered in Ahmedabad? I see the hands, but most of you have been to Mayapur, right? We began this ISKCON India Youth Convention in Mayapur in 2016 November. You may or may not be aware of that. It started only 5 years ago when we united all the youth preachers from all over India. And this is a very good sign that there are so many youth preachers now that we have to have regional conventions to accommodate everyone. It's a sign of progress. So there was only one building in Mayapur, 400 devotees came. And after attending Gaur Purnima, we all went to Vrindavan. And in Vrindavan, Prabhupada divided the 400 into 2 groups. And he ordered everyone have to and learn Varnashram. And the other 50%, 200 devotees, he sent them to Bombay, and he went to Bombay to do satyagraha, protesting a letter that was issued from a government. I don't call him a government officer because it was a ceremonial post. I don't know if it even still exists, called the Sheriff of Bombay. And it was something that the British created during the British Raj to honor prominent members of society by giving them a title, but no power. But this Sheriff of Bombay in 1974, beginning of 74, issued a letter that ISKCON's kirtan is a nuisance. And so Prabhupada wanted to protest that. So half of us went to Bombay and half he sent back to Mayapur. The point why I remember this history, Prabhupada wanted the devotees from abroad to learn Vedic culture and Varnashram Dharma. And if anybody says that we are not following Varnashram Dharma, or we cannot follow Varnashram Dharma, is unfortunately ignorant of history and what Prabhupada wrote in his purports. In this connection, 9th canto, 10th chapter, 50 and 51, Srimad Bhagavatam, Prabhupada clearly instructs that we should all follow the Varnashram Dharma. Now, he said it is birth, and birth alone is not the qualification for being a Brahmin. And we accept that. There's no question. But there are my God brothers, I don't want to mention any names, who say that there's no need to follow Varnashram. So, you know, when we talk about Prabhupada being the ideal youth preacher, what was he preaching? One of our God brothers, who was a very prominent devotee in the 1970s, and the last time I saw him was on Navadvip Parikrama in Mayapur in 1993. And he published a book at that time. And I think the title of the book was Preaching in the Pacific Rim. So in India, people, they don't know what it means, Pacific Rim. It's what's the word? I mean, there's a word to describe it. It's a kind of is it colloquial? It's an expression that's used in the United States to refer to countries that are touching the Pacific Ocean. I mean, you all know the Pacific Ocean. So the United States has a big coastline on the Pacific Ocean. But the other side is China, the Philippines, even Malaysia, Indonesia. So the whole area is called the Pacific Rim. So this devotee began ISKCON preaching Australia. Is called the Pacific Rim. Australia is the Pacific Ocean. It's a big island, right? New Zealand. So this devotee went there. I don't know if you ever heard his name, Bali Mardan. How many of you heard his name? Wow, okay. So Bali Mardan wrote this tiny book in the early 1990s. And one of the things he wrote in the book we were preaching something that we didn't know very much about. I mean, even when I joined and I was 17, Bhagavatams were coming. You know, Prabhupada was translating and they were being printed. And then there was a famous marathon, I think it was in 1975, when the whole Chaitanya Charitamrita, you know, in that time, you know, there were 16 volumes. I can't remember exactly. Now it's come down to 9 volumes, but it was printed in more smaller books. And they published the whole Chaitanya Charitamrita in 2.5 months. So that was a major achievement. But ISKCON, you can call it a fledgling. You know this word, fledgling? I'm speaking in English, but boy, Hindi mein baat karna hai ki nahi? Anyway, Angrezi mein chalte hai to chalte rahenge. So, fledgling means, you know, newborn. And there's another word in English, nascent. How many of you know this word, nascent? Let's see the hands. There are a few hands. Nascent means the beginning stages. So in those early days of ISKCON, you have Westerners like myself who aren't from Hindu families and don't really know what is Indian culture or Vedic culture. And yet that's what Prabhupada was preaching. That's why when, you know, there were pictures of Prabhupada visiting Los Angeles in 1968, 69. I mean, this is 52, 53 years ago. That's a long time ago, right? And I don't think even youth preachers in India, our eldest youth preachers, the, you know, biggest and most successful youth preachers are just 52, 53 years old. But at that time, Prabhupada had all of his disciples in dhotis and saris, right? There was, somebody wrote a description. Prabhupada arrived at the temple in Los Angeles and all you could see were dhotis and saris. The whole street where the temple is located was filled up with devotees. So, you know, what was Prabhupada preaching? That we also have to focus on. That we glorifying Srila Prabhupada, we do it. We do it on his Vyas Puja. We have a daily Guru Puja, which didn't exist in the Gaudiya Math, right? Even Prabhupada didn't introduce that daily Guru Puja. He sanctioned it. He said it's okay, you can do. But wasn't introduced by Prabhupada. I'm not opposing it. I'm just saying, historically, when I joined ISKCON, there was no Guru Puja. Yeah, there was a Mangal Arati, the Darshan Arati, Bhagavatam class. Evening, there was a Gita class. Actually, the Gita class is one of the reasons I joined. I got the Gita, and anyway, Prabhupada, when he came to the West and young people were helping him, and then this may not be well known, but it's in the Leelamrita, the Prabhupada biography, that he toured many colleges and universities to preach to the youth. And Prabhupada, I was with Prabhupada one time, and he was telling us that he was in the university giving the lecture, and after the lecture, someone, you know, he said that in your next life, if you're, you know, if you live like a hog, you'll become a hog. So in the question period, excuse me, a little water here. In the question period, one of the students asked Prabhupada, what is wrong with becoming a hog? You know, this was the kind of, and Prabhupada said that would you like to become a hog in your next life? He said that hogs, they eat stool. They live in dirt, and they think that that's happiness. And that student replied to Prabhupada. He said, well, if the pigs are happy, what's wrong with that? So Prabhupada said to us that that fellow was so hard-hearted. He used these words, hard-hearted, that he thought it's, okay to become a hog. So, Prabhupada dealt with quite a bit of opposition. And I'm sure all of us who are preachers, and especially even the youth preachers, there will be challenges and opposition. And there's opposition to what Prabhupada taught from amongst us also. So be careful. You all know what's going on, that there's a parallel movement in India to ISKCON, right? And it started with one man saying, I am right and all of you are wrong. And now that one man has 21 or 25 or whatever centers. And where you are right now in Ahmedabad, they have a booming center. So these things, we should be aware of this. We should be aware of this, and we should understand the challenges. The Prabhupada had to face this type of challenges. There's another thing. Prabhupada was preaching in predominantly Christian countries, but he wasn't propagating Christianity, isn't it? We all know this. Now, there are good qualities in Christianity, but he also criticized killing animals. Christianity, most of the Christians, there may be some exceptions, eat non-vegetarian food from a slaughterhouse. So in Vedic culture, Kshatriyas were allowed to go and kill animals, certain animals, but not the cow. They were to go in a forest and kill deer or lions and tigers like that. And the meat of those animals was offered to demigods, certain demigods. But in the Western religions, they say that the animals are food for human beings. Now, what they're missing is this concept, which is in Gita and in Vedas, of the three gunas, Rajoguna, Tamoguna, Sattvaguna. So non-vegetarian food is tamasic. But slaughterhouse is worse, Prabhupada said. So even if Shudras were allowed, Prabhupada wrote like that, Shudras can eat the meat of unimportant animals, but never cows. Cows should never be killed. And in the Western world, eating cow's meat is like drinking a glass of water. So common. So there was, a lot of difficulty Prabhupada had to face. But youth are more impressionable. If you're fixed in your ways, taking intoxication and eating non-vegetarian food your whole life, in your old age, how will you give it up? So I know a godbrother, he's a good friend of mine, and he brought my mother and his mother to India. It's almost 23 years ago. And my mother expired in Baroda, it's almost 14 years ago. Makara Sankranti 2008. And his mother is 99 completed, 100 running. She was like 9 years older than my mother. We went to Vrindavan, Mayapur. His mother didn't come to Mayapur. She was tired and she stayed in the hotel at the airport in Calcutta. My mother came to Mayapur. My mother left her body in India. But her vegetarian history was only those last month and a half in Baroda. And to convince these old people to become vegetarian, to become sattvic, it's very difficult. But Prabhupada could convince the youth by prasadam. And many, many Western devotees, you'll talk to them, why did you become a devotee? They'll tell you prasadam. They'll tell you prasadam. And you know the story. Prabhupada himself was making the gulab jamuns. Prabhupada himself was cooking and cleaning up. He was cooking, serving, cleaning up. It's adbhutam. It's a wonderful story. How he could impress the youth to join and then make them preachers, even though they didn't know much. But his overall aim was to bring everyone to India. And he spent his time and his money in his last years in India. If you go over the history of Prabhupada, he spread the movement, no doubt, all over the world. But then he brought everyone to India. He spent money to build the Juhu temple, the Krishna Balaram Mandir, and he had the vision for the, excuse me, he had the vision for the TOVP. Now, it took a long time after he disappeared for the TOVP to even start, but it's almost ready. Credit goes to Prabhupada for inspiring one young man who was very young at the time, right? Now he's 70, but you're talking 45 years ago, 50 years ago, almost. 48 years ago, this rich young man, Ambarish Prabhu, became a dedicated disciple of Srila Prabhupada. And if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't have the TOVP.